I was about to marry a perfect man until my grandmother, who had been dead for 10 years, appeared in my dream and told me, "Don't marry him. You have to find the child he abandoned." I thought I was stepping into a wedding, but it turned out I had just opened the door to a tragedy.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
My name is Maya Thompson. I'm 31 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. They say dreams are just fragments of the subconscious, flickers of memory, flashes of fear, longing. But what do you do when a dream feels more like a visitation? When the woman who raised you appears by your bedside in the dead of night, smelling like her old gardenias, and tells you something so impossible, so terrifying. You wake up and your entire life feels suddenly, violently misaligned? That night, everything shifted, and it started with the ring. It was a Saturday, one of those pristine North Carolina mornings where the sunlight pours through the blinds like warm milk, and everything should feel safe. I should have felt happy. I was engaged to a man any woman in her right mind would have fought for. Daniel Cross, a rising real estate magnate with a disarming smile and a last name that looked good on magazine covers. We lived in a condo that overlooked the skyline of Charlotte, a city that, like Daniel, was always climbing, always chasing some shinier version of itself. But I wasn't in my right mind, not anymore. I sat at the kitchen island, fingers tracing the rim of my coffee cup, staring at the engagement ring on my finger. It was beautiful. 2 carats, vintage cushion cut, platinum band. But every time it caught the light, something inside me recoiled. It wasn't awe, it wasn't joy, it was dread. That morning, I called in sick to work. I was a senior analyst at one of the largest financial firms in the city, and lying about stomach flu felt like a betrayal. But I needed time to breathe, or maybe to fall apart. I spent most of the afternoon rearranging drawers that didn't need rearranging. At one point, I sat on the edge of the bathtub and just cried. For no reason and for every reason, a gnawing sense of disconnection had taken root in me, like my life was being lived out of sync, as if I'd boarded the wrong train years ago and only now realized it. By the time night fell, I was emotionally wrung out. I poured myself a glass of wine I couldn't finish and crawled into bed early. I remember glancing at my phone, 9:42 p.m., and thinking I should text him. Daniel was at some investor dinner uptown, but I didn't text. I turned the phone face down and shut my eyes, and that's when she came. Rose. My grandmother had died 2 years ago. After a long decline I hadn't handled well. She'd raised me after my mother disappeared into addiction, and she loved me with a fierceness that often felt like armor. She believed in omens, signs, gut instincts, what she called the old blood magic from the mountains her people came from. She appeared by my bed as clearly as if she were still alive, wearing her worn lavender cardigan, silver hair in soft waves, eyes sharp with urgency. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. All I could do was watch her lips form the words, "Do not marry this man," I gasped awake, heart pounding, sheets soaked in sweat. I was trembling, not from fear, from recognition, because deep down, in some place I'd buried beneath spreadsheets and cocktail dresses and the curated perfection of Daniel's world. I already knew, but she wasn't done. Her voice lingered in my mind, a second sentence echoing like a ripple in a well. "His heart holds a ruin you do not know. Go find the child he left behind." A child? I sat upright, shaking, reaching for my phone, my journal, anything to anchor me. But the message was clear. This wasn't just cold feet. This wasn't wedding stress. This was something darker, something older, something that had festered behind Daniel's impeccable smile and well-tailored suits. Something that had been waiting for me to look close enough. I didn't sleep again that night. I paced. I wrote everything down. I heard my own breath catch every time the air conditioner clicked on. And when the sun rose, I didn't feel rested. I felt haunted. But I also felt free. Like someone had finally sliced open the veil I'd been trying so hard to pretend wasn't there. That morning, I called Daniel and told him I was taking a week off. A wellness reset. He laughed and said he'd already booked us a wine tour for the weekend. I forced a smile into my voice and told him I'd be back in time. I lied. Instead, I packed a small bag, got in my car, and drove. I didn't know where I was going exactly, only that I needed to go backward, not forward, to retrace the threads of Daniel's life, not mine. The woman in the dream hadn't warned me about infidelity or money. She warned me about a child he left behind. And that changed everything. Daniel rarely spoke about his past. I'd asked once about his childhood, and he gave a vague answer about growing up in Raleigh with a complicated mom and a lot of pressure. I never pushed. He always changed the subject with a kiss or a joke or a perfectly timed distraction. But now, the absence of those stories felt sinister. 3 hours later, I was parked outside a modest brick house in a quiet part of town, the home of Patricia Cross, Daniel's mother. I hadn't told Daniel I was coming. I hadn't even told myself until I got in the car. But as I stepped out and felt the weight of the ring on my hand again, I knew this was the first real choice I'd made in months. The door opened before I knocked. Patricia stood there in a robe, hair half done, mascara slightly smudged. Her eyes widened when she saw me, surprised but not displeased. "Maya," she said, voice tight with confusion. "What a surprise. I'm sorry to drop in," I said, trying to steady my breath. "But I was hoping we could talk." She looked past me as if checking for Daniel. Then, after a pause, she nodded and stepped aside. "Of course," she said. "Come in. I was just making tea." But before I stepped over the threshold, I saw her, a blonde woman with hollow cheeks and haunted eyes, slipping out the back door like smoke. Not sneaking, not ashamed, just escaping. And before she disappeared, she turned and gave me the smallest, most desperate nod I've ever seen. Like she was passing the torch. Like she was saying, "Please, find out the truth, because I can't carry it anymore." I didn't know it then, but that nod was the beginning of the unraveling. And nothing in my life, not the engagement, not the career, not even the love I thought I had, would survive what came next. If the dream was the spark that cracked open my world, then stepping into Patricia Cross's house was the moment the fissure widened. Quiet, subtle, but irreversible. I didn't know it then, but everything I saw, every word she said, every tremor in her voice, it all belonged to a truth I was never meant to discover. The house was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, contained quiet, like someone had pressed a hand over its mouth. The hallway smelled faintly of stale perfume and dust, with a sharper undercurrent of bleach, the scent of someone desperate to scrub away whatever had stained their life. I stepped inside, feeling the air thicken around me. The door clicked shut behind us with a softness that felt intentional, like the house itself didn't want to make noise. Patricia moved ahead of me, her figure slim, posture so rigid it seemed carved. I followed her into the living room, my eyes immediately scanning the shelves. No photos, none. Not one of Daniel as a child, not one family portrait, not even a framed candid. Just porcelain vases, artificial flowers, and an antique clock ticking too loudly for the room it lived in. It struck me harder than I expected. The absence. When someone loves their child, they display them. They celebrate the proof of their existence. But here, Daniel's presence had been edited out. "Make yourself comfortable," Patricia said, smoothing the front of her cardigan before heading toward the kitchen. "I'll bring tea." Her voice was practiced, polite, and heavy with something I couldn't quite name. I sat on the love seat, running my fingers along the fabric. It felt untouched, unlived in, like it only served visitors, not family. My gaze drifted to the coffee table, where a stack of magazines lay fanned out too neatly, as if staged before a real estate showing. And that's when I saw her again, through the living room window. The back door swung open. A woman stepped out, her blonde hair pulled into a messy knot, her shoulders hunched against a cold that wasn't there. She wasn't hiding, she wasn't sneaking, she was escaping. And for one suspended second, she turned her head just enough for me to see her face. Hollow cheeks, sleepless eyes, the imprint of heartbreak carved deep. And then, that nod, barely there, but unmistakably a silent plea. Help. My skin prickled. My pulse quickened, heavy in my throat. Before I could stand, Patricia returned with a silver tray, china clinking against it. "Who was that woman?" I asked as casually as I could. She froze for a fraction of a second, a microscopic delay that told me everything. "Oh, her?" Patricia forced a natural smile, placing the tray down. "Just someone from church. She helps with our outreach program. Poor thing's been through a lot." Her voice said sympathy. Her eyes said annoyance. She looked like she wanted to say something, I pressed gently. Patricia poured tea with a steadiness that didn't match the tension in her jaw. "You're reading too much into it, dear. She's fragile. Best not to involve yourself." "Involve myself?" She might as well have said, "Stay out of it." I lifted my teacup, but my eyes drifted to the table again. And that's when I saw it. Peeking from beneath a ceramic coaster was a folded sheet of paper. The edge was crumpled, as if crushed in someone's fist. A familiar blue and white laboratory logo appeared in the corner. My breath hitched. DNA Diagnostics. The letters pulsed in my vision. Heat rushed to my face. My heart thudded so hard I had to grip the cup to steady my hand. Patricia didn't notice, or pretended not to. "I worry about Daniel," she said, sipping her tea. "He tries so hard to appear strong, to appear capable. But marriage is demanding, Maya. It requires emotional endurance, stability." There it was again, the test. The subtle evaluation of whether I could handle him, whether I could absorb whatever damage he carried so he wouldn't have to face it. "I'm strong," I said quietly. Patricia tilted her head, studying me like an object up for appraisal. "I hope so. He needs someone sturdy, someone who understands his history." "The history he never talks about," I replied before I could stop myself. Her expression sharpened. "He will, in time." "And the woman who just left? Does she know his history?" Patricia set her cup down a little too quickly. "I think we should focus on happier things," she said, "like your engagement. Or perhaps I can show you a picture of him as a child." She stood abruptly, smoothing her cardigan again. "I'll fetch one from the attic." As soon as her footsteps faded upstairs, I moved. My hands trembled as I slid the coaster aside and unfolded the paper. There it was, clinical, unforgiving, absolute. Paternity test results. Alleged father, Daniel Cross. Result, positive, 99.98% probability. The breath left my body like someone had punched it out of me. I covered my mouth, tears stinging unexpectedly at the corners of my eyes. A child. A real child somewhere out there. Flesh and blood. Abandoned by the man who had slipped a ring onto my finger and asked me to build a life with him. My vision blurred. I forced myself to take a picture with my phone, hands shaking violently. Then I refolded the paper, tucking it back perfectly, just as I heard Patricia descending the stairs. She returned with a single photo, small, faded around the edges. "This was Daniel at 5, she said, handing it to me. In the picture, a little boy with dark, guarded eyes stood stiff beside a bed. A man, tall, severe, cold, stood behind him, a hand on his shoulder like a claim, not affection. "His father?" I whispered. Patricia nodded, her smile strained. "Yes, before he left." Her tone didn't mourn a loss. It concealed a truth. I forced myself to ask, "Did Daniel ever want children?" Her lips tightened. "Some people aren't meant to be parents," she said softly. "Some people break too easily." I swallowed hard, the weight of the DNA test burning holes through my memory. She led me to the door a few minutes later. Her goodbye hug felt rehearsed, her fingertips cold. "You'll make a beautiful bride, Maya," I smiled. But my stomach turned. As I stepped outside, the air hit me like a slap. Crisp, real, full of sounds this house had been suffocating. I walked to my car like someone moving underwater. The moment I shut the door, everything shattered. Tears spilled hot and uncontrollable. My hands trembled against the steering wheel, the photo of the DNA results replaying in my mind on a loop. Lena's face appeared behind my eyelids. That desperate nod, the silent warning. Find the child. I drove aimlessly for almost 20 minutes before pulling into a gas station parking lot. I turned off the engine and sat there, chest rising and falling too fast. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel. My grandmother's voice returned to me, clearer than the dream itself. "His heart holds a ruin you do not know. Go find the child he left behind. Now I knew, not everything, but enough. Enough to break the illusion. Enough to break the engagement. Enough to break me. But something else rose inside me too. Not anger, not betrayal. Something deeper, a purpose. The truth wasn't just calling, it was begging. And I wasn't going to look away, not now. Not after what I saw. Not after what she warned me. There's a certain kind of quiet that settles over you when you realize someone has lied. Not once, not casually, but with the full intention of hiding something essential. It doesn't come with anger right away, it comes with weight. Heavy, ancient, unmovable. That's what I felt the next morning. Not fury, but the weight of unspoken things pressing down on me as I stared at the photo on my phone. DNA test. Daniel Cross. 19 auto 98%. It played over and over in my mind as I watched cream swirl into my coffee, untouched. I hadn't spoken to Daniel. I hadn't told him I was in town. I hadn't even told myself what I planned to do next. But I knew I couldn't go back to Charlotte yet. Not with this much unanswered. So I made another choice. I drove back to Patricia's. Not to interrogate, not yet. I needed something else, something soft, disarming, human. I told myself I needed more time to think, but really I needed to see how far she would go to protect a lie. When she opened the door, her face flickered, the surprise poorly concealed. Maya, back so soon? I never got to finish that tea, I said with a small smile, and I could really use some warmth today. She hesitated, a fraction too long, then stepped aside. Of course, come in. This time, I didn't sit in the living room. She gestured toward the sunroom, where light poured in through sheer curtains, bouncing off polished wood floors and glass furniture. It looked like a room meant to be seen but not touched, like the rest of the house. But Patricia was trying. She'd arranged a tray with tea, biscuits, a little jar of jam. It was domestic, almost charming, and entirely calculated. We talked, or rather, she did. She spoke of Daniel's childhood like it was a collection of softened edges. He was quiet, you know, sensitive, always wanted to please. I nodded, watching her face closely. His father left very suddenly, she continued, eyes fixed on her teacup. That did something to him. He never fully trusted anyone again after that. I stayed silent, let her fill the space. He dated, of course. Women were always drawn to him, even back then. But he struggled with the idea of permanence. I don't think he believed anyone would stay. And there it was. The rewriting. I knew enough now to recognize a version of truth that had been carefully washed and ironed. She wasn't lying outright. She was curating. Was there anyone serious before me? I asked gently. A flicker crossed her face, barely noticeable, unless you were looking for it. There were a few, she said, folding a napkin with perfect precision. But none who understood him. One in particular, she was unstable, thought love meant chaos, tried to force a family onto him. It was painful. Tried to force a family. The words turned sour in my mouth. Did it get far? I asked. She sipped her tea, then placed it down, porcelain clinking just a bit too loudly. She left. Eventually, it was for the best. No mention of a child. No mention of Lena. Just a neat dismissal, like clearing away crumbs from a tablecloth. My heart thudded. I leaned forward, pretending interest, pretending naivety. What was her name? Patricia hesitated. Lena, she said finally, the name dropping like a stone into the room. I believe she lives nearby still. Sad girl, always looked empty. I swallowed hard. I think I saw her. That got her attention. Her eyes snapped to mine. She was here yesterday, wasn't she? Patricia didn't answer. Instead, she stood up abruptly and walked to the side cabinet. From it, she pulled a dusty album, the leather cracked at the spine. She brought it over and sat beside me, flipping it open with reverence. If you're going to marry my son, she said, you should know where he came from. She turned page after page. Baby photos, school pictures, Daniel in Halloween costumes, Daniel at soccer games. All the images she hadn't displayed in the house now laid bare, like proof of something. But there were gaps, whole years missing, entire swaths of adolescence left undocumented. And then she stopped. One photo, an old Polaroid. In it, a woman, Lena, young but weary, cradled a newborn. Her hospital gown wrinkled, her hair disheveled, her expression distant. And behind her, at the edge of the frame, was Daniel, turned away, back half visible, like he couldn't bear to face what he had created. Patricia's hand hovered over the photo for a long time before she spoke. She wanted to trap him, she whispered. She thought having a baby would make him stay. My throat closed. So he left? He had to, she said sharply, eyes flaring. He was too young, too scared, and she demanded too much. That girl was never stable. That child, it wasn't a family, it was a prison. She spoke like a woman justifying war crimes. I stared at the image, not of betrayal, of erasure. You think it was her fault, I said quietly. Patricia turned to me, voice icy. My son was broken long before she came along, but she made him feel worthless, like he could never get it right. So he walked away, to survive. I looked down at the child in the photo, swaddled, innocent. Did he ever see the baby again? Silence. Patricia? She closed the album and stood, walking toward the window. He tried once, she said. Showed up at her apartment. But the baby cried, and Lena was screaming. He told me he couldn't breathe in there, said it felt like drowning. My chest burned. You told him to leave, I said. Her shoulders stiffened. I told him to choose his future. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she turned to me and said, almost gently, Maya, people have pasts. Daniel's is painful, but he's not a monster. No, he wasn't. He was something more complicated. A man terrified of responsibility. A boy who never learned to stay. But the child he left behind? They weren't a mistake, and they didn't deserve to be folded into someone else's shame. I should go, I said, rising. Patricia didn't stop me. She simply nodded, returning to the window like this whole conversation had been a formality. As I stepped outside, the sunlight hit me like a slap. It felt too bright, too raw, like it was illuminating things that were meant to stay in shadow. I walked to my car slowly, the album image still seared into my memory. Lena, broken. Daniel, turned away. A baby, small, abandoned, forgotten. But not anymore. I opened my phone and stared at the only clue I had. The photo of the DNA test, now joined by the mental image of that child's face, barely days old. This wasn't about a broken engagement anymore. This was about a legacy of fear, one that ended here, with me. Some betrayals are loud, dramatic, theatrical, a slammed door, a scream, a confession in the rain. But the worst ones? They arrive quietly. They sit next to you, pour you tea, and talk about the weather. They smile, and they wait for you to find the rot beneath the kindness. That's what I walked into the morning I returned to Patricia Cross's house. I hadn't told Daniel I was still in town, and I hadn't told myself exactly why I was there. Not at first. But something in me, something deeper than instinct, told me I hadn't seen the whole truth yet. Not just in what Patricia had shown, but in what she had carefully, masterfully chosen not to. She opened the door slower this time. Her makeup less precise. Her cardigan was wrinkled, and she didn't pretend to be surprised. Maya, she said, like my name tasted bitter in her mouth. You should have called. I'm not here for pleasantries, I replied. I need to see it, all of it. For a long second, she simply stared at me, not coldly, but like someone mentally weighing cost against consequence. Then, without a word, she stepped aside. This time, the house felt different. Not more honest, just tired. The walls no longer whispered reassurance. They absorbed the truth like smoke, clinging to everything. Patricia didn't lead me to the sunroom or the kitchen. She walked to the bookshelf, pulled out the same worn album I'd seen before, and set it down on the coffee table between us. I wasn't going to show you this, she said quietly, but you don't strike me as the type to stop digging. Her fingers hovered over the cover like it still had heat. I sat across from her, hands folded, steady. Then don't show me what you think I can handle. Show me what happened. She opened it. Pages turned. Childhood snapshots of Daniel with scraped knees and a bowl haircut. The kind of photos that every family has, filled with smiles that, in retrospect, feel almost forced. Then school portraits, birthday cakes, drawings in crayon. But something was missing. There were gaps, pages where the narrative skipped, places where time went unaccounted for. And then, she stopped. The page had only one photo, carefully centered, tucked into the plastic sleeve like a secret someone had tried to forget. It wasn't a wedding photo, not even close. It was a hospital room, sterile, gray, dimly lit by a fluorescent bulb, the kind that hums. Lana sat propped in the bed, her hair damp, clinging to her forehead. Her hospital gown was rumpled, her face pale, exhausted, not glowing, but haunted. In her arms, a newborn, bundled in that universal striped blanket, eyes closed, impossibly small. And Daniel. He stood beside the bed, arms crossed, back turned halfway to the camera. His jaw was tight, his eyes hollow. He wasn't looking at the baby. He wasn't looking at Lena. He was staring out the window as though trying to find the exit. Patricia didn't speak. I reached out, touching the edge of the image through the plastic. "Who took this?" "I did," she replied. "He asked me to be there, for support." My stomach turned. "She thought having a baby would fix things," she said softly, almost with pity. "But it only exposed the cracks." I looked at her. "You make it sound like love was a trap." She was older. She pushed for more. He wasn't ready. "He was 19, I said, my voice calm but sharp. "Not a child." "And still broken," Patricia shot back. "Still drowning in the mess his father left behind." I stared at the image again. The baby was so small, so unaware of the burden it already carried. Did Daniel ever hold him? Silence. I looked up. "Patricia?" She didn't meet my gaze. Once, for less than a minute. The baby cried. He panicked. "Did he name him?" Another pause. "No, Lena did. She named him Elijah." The name hit like a small thud in my chest. A name I hadn't expected to hear. A name that made the child real, in a way even the photograph hadn't. "Did you ever visit them?" "She brought him here once," Patricia admitted. "When he was 4. Said he wanted to know his father." "And what did Daniel do?" "He refused to come downstairs." I closed the album. "You saw this happen, Patricia," I said. "And you said nothing." "I said everything I could," she hissed, standing now, pacing the room. "I tried to help him survive. Do you know what it's like to raise someone who shakes at the idea of being needed? Of being responsible?" "Yes," I whispered, "because I've been loving him in that same silence." She turned to me, eyes glassy. "I did what I thought was right." "You erased them," I said. "That baby, that woman. You erased them from his story so he could start over. And now he's built a new life on that silence. And yet, here you are," she said, trying to pick up their pieces. There was no venom in her voice, just resignation. I stood slowly, the weight of everything I had seen finally pressing down on my spine. I'm not here to pick up pieces. I'm here because I can't marry a man whose life is built on the ruins of people he chose to abandon. As I walked to the door, she followed. "Maya, he's not a monster. He's just afraid." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Then he shouldn't have asked someone else to carry what he refused to face. Outside, the air was heavier than I remembered. The sun didn't warm me, the wind didn't soothe. Everything felt raw, too loud, too real. In the car, I sat for a long moment, fingers trembling against the steering wheel. I pulled up the photo of Elijah, that tiny boy in the arms of a woman holding the wreckage of her hope. And then I searched. I typed Lena's full name into my phone. It wasn't hard to find. A FAR, bookstore, a phone number, an address. She hadn't tried to hide. I stared at the screen, pulse thumping. There were 100 things I didn't know, 100 consequences I wasn't prepared for, but I couldn't look away anymore. Because somewhere in a nearby town, there was a boy named Elijah, maybe playing with a toy, maybe asking questions his mother couldn't answer. And somewhere behind his life was a silence shaped like a father. And I wouldn't be another person who let that silence grow. Some truths don't scream when they surface. They whisper. They unravel you not with rage, but with grief. And sometimes the worst part of being lied to isn't the lie itself. It's realizing you believed it because you wanted to. That night I called Daniel, not to accuse, not yet, but to ask if he'd come home early. I said I missed him, that I needed us to talk without distractions. He didn't ask why, just said he'd be there by 7. I made chamomile tea. I lit one candle. I wore the blue sweater he once said brought out my eyes. Every part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, to throw the ring across the room. But I didn't. Because what I needed wasn't vengeance. It was truth. And if I couldn't look it in the eye calmly, I would never survive what came next. When he walked through the door, Daniel looked tired. Not from work, from the weight of the mask he wore so effortlessly. The one I used to think was confidence. Now I knew it was armor. "Hey," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I stepped back. His eyes flicked to mine, alert. "What's going on?" I gestured to the kitchen table. "Sit." He obeyed slowly, sensing the shift in the air. I sat across from him. The envelope sat between us, plain, unmarked. Inside it was a printed copy of the paternity test I had taken a photo of. I didn't speak right away. I let him feel the silence press in. He reached for the envelope. I didn't stop him. He pulled out the paper. His eyes scanned the page. His lips parted, but he didn't speak. He just blinked, slowly, once, twice. His fingers curled slightly around the edges. I watched him break, not loudly, not all at once, but in pieces. First, the swallow. Then the tightening of his jaw. Then the shallow breath he tried to hide. "You knew," I said. His voice, when it came, was low, hoarse. "It wasn't supposed to follow me here," I flinched. "It? You mean your child?" Daniel dragged his hands down his face. "Maya." "No," I said, sharper than I meant. "Don't explain yet. Just tell me this. Was there ever a version of our life where you were going to tell me?" His head dropped. "I don't know." I felt something inside me crack. Not from shock anymore, but from confirmation. The silence hadn't been accidental. It had been chosen. "I met your mother," I said. 3 times. She told me pieces, but not the whole thing. I found that myself. His shoulders curled inward, defensive. "I wasn't ready." "You weren't ready to be a father? You weren't ready to say, 'I made a life I walked away from'?" "It's not that simple," he snapped. "No, Daniel, it's exactly that simple." He stood, walked in a slow circle, like the room was a cage. "You don't know what it was like. I was 19, she was older, controlling. That pregnancy wasn't planned. And when Elijah was born, I panicked. I thought I'd suffocate. I couldn't breathe in that hospital room." "And what about now?" I asked. "What's your excuse for now?" He stopped, his back to me. I thought, if I could start over, if I could be the man you deserved, that maybe I wouldn't ruin things again. I rose slowly, walked to the other side of the room, not to distance myself and to steady myself. "Daniel, you didn't just ruin a relationship, you left behind a child." He turned. His eyes were bloodshot. "I know. I live with that every single day." "Do you?" I asked, because I saw a photo of Lena in that hospital bed. Broken, alone. You were standing in the corner like you couldn't bear to be in the same room as your own son. His hands clenched. I wasn't in my right mind. "Then why didn't you fix it later, when you got sober? When Lena brought him to your doorstep? You hid." "I was afraid," he said quietly, "of him. Of what he'd see when he looked at me." I stepped closer, my voice soft now. "You were afraid he'd see himself. Or you?" He sank into a chair like his legs gave out. "I thought I could outrun it." "You can't." Silence. Then, with a broken laugh, he whispered, "I never deserved you." And there it was as the confession, not an apology, but something almost heavier. I placed the printed DNA test on the table in front of him. "You're right, you didn't." He looked up, and for a moment he was just a boy again. The 19-year-old he once was, curled inside the body of a man trying to be better without facing the damage behind him. "I don't need to marry you," I said gently. "But that child, he still needs a father." His breath caught. I saw it hit him, not as guilt, but as possibility, a second chance. A chance he didn't deserve, and yet desperately needed. "You said his name?" I asked. "Elijah," he whispered. I nodded. "Then you say it again, this time like it matters." "His name is Elijah," he said, louder, steadier. We both stood in the silence that followed. Not tense, not hostile, Just hollow. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Hello? A woman's voice, Lena's, soft, raw. Is this Maya? I froze. Yes. I heard you've been asking questions. I'm not calling to accuse. I need you to know I tried. I tried so hard. But I couldn't protect Daniel from himself. My throat tightened. I know. I didn't tell Elijah who his father was. He thinks he left on a work trip, a really long one. Tears stung my eyes. I'm not here to ruin his image, I said. But Daniel needs to see him. He needs to try. There was silence on the other end. Then Lena said, almost in a whisper, Okay, but not for him, for Elijah. And she hung up. I looked at Daniel. You have one chance. His voice cracked. I know. I didn't hug him. I didn't console him. But I did place the ring he gave me on the table, next to the test. I'll stay for now, I said. But not as your fiancé. He didn't try to change my mind. And that somehow hurt more than anything. Some stories don't end where the heartbreak happens. They bend, twist. Sometimes they lead you to other people carrying the same kind of silence. The kind that doesn't shout for help, doesn't rage or accuse. It just waits. Quietly. Until someone is brave enough to say, I see you. That was how it started. 2 days after I confronted Daniel, I drove to a quiet park on the outskirts of town. Lena had agreed to meet me. She brought Elijah. Daniel didn't come. He said he wasn't ready. I wasn't sure if that meant he was still hiding, or finally being honest. I arrived early, parked far enough to breathe before seeing them. In the passenger seat beside me, a paper bag held a warm handful of cookies from the bakery near my apartment. Tucked beside it, a small red wooden train. I'd bought it weeks ago, without reason. That morning, I finally knew why. Lena was already there, sitting beneath an old oak tree whose roots reached across the ground like open hands. She looked older than her age, not worn down, but weathered. Her hair was tied back in a no-nonsense braid. Elijah sat beside her, legs swinging, gripping a plastic superhero with one arm missing. He glanced up when he saw me, curious, not scared. His eyes were wide and impossibly familiar. I crouched down so I wouldn't tower over him. Hi, I said, offering a soft smile. I'm Maya. He blinked at me, said nothing. I brought you something, I added, pulling the red train from the bag. It's a little bumpy on the edges, but it still rolls. He took it carefully, turned it over in his small hands. Then, just barely, he smiled. Lena's shoulders dropped, like she'd been holding her breath and finally remembered how to exhale. We sat on the bench without words for a while. Elijah played at our feet, pushing the train across a crack in the pavement like it was a canyon. I watched him and thought, this is the child Daniel couldn't face. This is the story he tried to edit out of his life. Lena broke the silence. You didn't have to come. I wanted to, I said. Not for Daniel. For you. For him. She looked at me. Why? Because I needed to see what he walked away from. And because I think you deserve to be heard by someone who's still listening. She didn't cry, but her voice cracked when she said, You're the first woman he ever loved who called me. I don't know if he ever really loved me, I admitted. Or if he just loved how easy I made it to forget. She nodded slowly. There were others. After me. Before you. I want to talk to them, I said. Not to gossip. Not to accuse. I need to understand the whole story. Lena thought for a moment. Angela was the one who reached out to me once. Through Facebook. She was young. Too young for him. She kept asking if it was her fault. I nodded. And Simone? Lena's eyes flickered. We met. Once. In passing. She was polite. Polished. Looked like she'd worked hard to convince herself she was special to him. Do you think they'd talk to me? She exhaled. I think they've been waiting to. Angela met me at a laundromat near the edge of the city. She looked younger than I expected. Maybe because pain makes some people shrink into themselves. She recognized me right away. You're the one from the photo, she said. The fiancé. Was, I corrected. We sat side by side on a plastic bench while her clothes spun behind glass. I told her everything. The dream, the hospital photo, the test result, the ring I'd taken off. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "He made me feel seen, until I wasn't." I asked her if Daniel ever told her about Lena, about Elijah. She shook her head. He said his past was unfinished. I thought I could finish it for him. "Would you meet Lena?" I asked. Angela hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, maybe it's time we stop being side notes in someone else's story." Simone was harder to find. She lived 2 states away now, worked in tech, responded to my message with one sentence. "I always knew there was more. Let me know when." 3 days later, we met under the same oak tree where I'd first seen Elijah's smile. Lena was there. Angela, too. Simone arrived in a slate gray coat, sunglasses pushed to the top of her head. She looked like someone who'd spent a long time building armor, but still remembered how to bleed. The 4 of us sat in a wide circle on the grass. No introductions, just silence. And then, one by one, we started to speak. Angela said, "He used to kiss my forehead every time I said something vulnerable. I thought it meant safety. Now I think it meant, shh, don't ask for more." Simone added, "He was most affectionate when I didn't need him. The moment I faltered, emotionally, financially, even just a bad day, he'd vanish," Lena said. "He loved me best before I got pregnant. Then I became a mirror he didn't want to look into." I listened, took it all in, the patterns, the rehearsed detachment, the way Daniel had built connection like a sandcastle, only when the tide was far away. Then, for the first time, I spoke. "I thought I was the final chapter," I said. "But now I realize I was just the next one to turn the page." We didn't cry, not at first. But when Elijah ran up to us, holding his little red train, laughing, cheeks flushed from the sun, something broke open. Simone crouched down. "He's beautiful," Lena nodded. "He's everything Daniel thought he couldn't be," Angela whispered. "He looks like him." And I said, "He doesn't act like him." That was the moment I knew this story no longer belonged to Daniel. It belonged to us. 4 women, 1 child, one long silence finally broken. That evening, I didn't go home. I drove straight to the ocean, parked just before midnight. The beach was empty, the tide full, the moon high. I kicked off my shoes and walked across the cold sand barefoot. The wind sharp against my face. I stood at the edge of the water and listened. Waves rolled in, rolled out. A rhythm older than grief, older than silence. I thought of Elijah's laugh, the way Lena clutched her coffee cup with both hands, the way Simone had reached for Angela's sleeve without realizing it. I pulled out my phone, opened a blank note, typed, "We are not what broke us. We are the hands that reached for each other after." Then I stood there, just Maya, not the fiancé, not the fixer, not the one who had to make him better. Just a woman who chose to stay and listen, even when it hurt. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt whole. You can't understand a wound just by looking at the scar. Scars tell you something happened, not what, not why, not how long it took to stop bleeding. That's why I couldn't stop at the facts. I had to trace the wound, to go back to the version of Daniel before everything cracked, before he became the man who couldn't look his own son in the eye. Patricia had once, in a moment of exhaustion, mentioned a name. He tried talking to Jonah from our old church. But you know Daniel. Doesn't like being seen too clearly. I remembered that name, Reverend Jonah Whitlow, so I drove. 2 hours west, past towns with no stoplights and gas stations that sold more fried food than fuel. I reached a small leaning chapel with peeling white paint and a sign that read, "Grace endures, Sundays at 9. The wooden door creaked open into stillness. Dust floated like memories in shafts of light. I found Reverend Jonah in the back, patching a crooked bookshelf with duct tape and humor. "You're here about Daniel," he said, before I even introduced myself. I blinked. "How do you know?" He smiled, sad and knowing. "There's only one person I know who leaves behind that much ache without trying." We sat in the last pew of the chapel. It smelled like beeswax and old wood. Outside, wind rustled the dry grass. "He was a boy who didn't cry when he bled," Jonah began. "Because crying made it worse at home. His father believed in discipline. That was his word. Discipline in fists and silence. You get enough of that young, and you start believing that you are the problem. I closed my eyes. I could almost see Daniel at 8, curled on a too small mattress, staring at the ceiling with the kind of stillness only children in pain learn. His mother, I asked. Fought for him, Jonah said, but she was battling her own ghosts. She loved him, but it came out in guilt. She taught him to hide, not to heal. There was a long pause. Once, he added, when Daniel was 15, he came in with a black eye and a busted lip. Said he tripped. I asked him if he believed in God. He said, I believe in disappearing before people get tired of me. That sentence, it knocked the wind out of me. He tried therapy, Jonah said. 3 sessions. Then he told me he'd fix himself by becoming someone no one could hurt. He thought if he just succeeded enough, dressed sharp enough, earned enough, the damage would vanish. I looked down at my hands. Did it? No, Jonah said gently. He just got better at hiding it. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small brass coin. Faded edges, time-worn. I gave this to him on his 17th birthday. He was sober for a year by then. He handed it to me. On it, barely visible, were the words, "You are not what was done to you." I clutched it. Do you think he ever believed that? Jonah's eyes glistened. I think he wanted to. That night, I met Daniel outside a quiet community center where he'd been volunteering. It shocked me when I found out. No one knew, no one asked him to. He just showed up on Tuesdays. Helped families with budgeting, taxes, job forms. It was something. He climbed into the passenger seat of my car, eyes wary. You talked to Jonah, he said. Not a question. I nodded. He remembers you. Daniel looked out the windshield. I wish I didn't remember him. I reached into my coat pocket, held out the coin. He took it, fingers trembling slightly. Turned it over. A beat, then another. He kept this, he asked, voice barely audible. I nodded. He said you came to him when your lip was split, and your hope was too. He swallowed. Hard. Do you know what it's like, Daniel said suddenly, to walk into a room and be more afraid of being loved than hated? Because at least with hate, you know where you stand. I didn't speak. I just let him say it. It was the first time he'd ever let me see him without the armor. He turned to me. I thought Elijah would see everything I hated in myself. I thought I'd taint him. I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. What if, I said, he saw a man who chose to be better even when it was hard? Daniel let out a shaky breath. Then maybe I could finally stop running. 2 days later, Daniel met Elijah. We didn't build it up. No speeches, no staged moments. Just a bench at the park, sunlight filtering through autumn trees. Lena stood nearby, arms folded, protective but not closed off. Elijah approached cautiously, holding his little red train. Daniel sat stiff, hands clenched. Hi, he said softly. I'm Daniel. Elijah blinked, looked to Lena. She gave a tiny nod. Then he sat beside him, not close, not far, just beside. They sat in silence. Then Elijah said, My train goes fast. Daniel smiled. I used to have one like that. Where is it now? Daniel paused. I don't know. I think I lost it when I got too big to play. Elijah nodded solemnly. You can use mine if you want. It was the smallest exchange. But in that moment, I saw something begin. Not forgiveness, not repair, but permission. Permission to begin again. Later, Lena stood beside me, arms crossed, watching them from a distance. He's still broken, she said. I know, I whispered. But maybe now he's ready to learn how to be whole. She didn't respond, but I saw the way her grip loosened on her own elbows. Before we left, I turned around. Elijah was holding Daniel's hand. Just lightly, not tightly, not desperately, just there. That night, I stood at my window, watching the wind stir the trees, and I thought, some men bury their pain so deep, they forget it ever had a name. But some dig it up, some hold it to the light. And for the first time, they choose not to. Pass it down. Daniel hadn't become his father. He had become the man who was finally brave enough to face him. In the mirror. And that was the beginning of everything. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from pressure. like the air right before a storm, thick with everything unsaid. That's what filled my kitchen the night I asked Daniel to come over. I didn't tell him why. I didn't promise kindness or safety or resolution, but he came, which in its own way meant everything. He stepped through the door with hesitation in his bones, not the kind that comes from fear of rejection, but the deeper kind, the one that comes from knowing you've been running for too long, and the road finally ran out. I had made tea, not because I expected him to drink it, but because it gave me something to hold, something warm, steady, something alive. He sat across from me at the table we once imagined building a life on. The last light of the day slid through the blinds, casting long shadows between us. He looked older, not in years, in weight, like the last few weeks had carved new lines into his face. "I wasn't sure you'd still want to see me," he said, voice low. "I didn't," I replied honestly, "but the truth deserves to be spoken, even if it's too late to change anything." He nodded once, as if bracing himself. I could have made it easier. I could have asked gentle questions, but that wasn't what tonight was about. So I said, "Tell me what you've never told anyone. Start there." Daniel exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a lifetime. "I don't remember the first time my father hit me," he began, eyes fixed on a crack in the table's surface. "But I remember the first time I realized I deserved it. Or at least, that's what I believed." My fingers tightened around my mug. I must have been 6. I spilled paint on his boots. He didn't even yell, just dragged me to the garage and locked the door. It was winter. I remember the cold more than the fear. I said nothing. This wasn't about me, not yet. I got older, learned when to stay quiet, how to anticipate his moods, how to disappear without leaving the room. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. "And the thing is," he continued, "when I left at 17, I thought I'd won. Thought I'd broken the cycle. But when Lena told me she was pregnant, something inside me cracked. Not because I didn't love her, I did. But I didn't believe love could stop me from becoming him." "You thought leaving would protect them," I said softly. He looked up, eyes glassy. "Yes, but it didn't." "No," he whispered. "It just made me him in a different way." We sat in silence. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him how much pain he caused, how his absence tore holes in lives that never stopped bleeding. But I didn't, because I'd already lived in that pain. I didn't need to hand it to him like a weapon. Instead, I reached for something deeper. "I had a dream before everything fell apart," I said. "It was my grandmother, Rose. She stood at the foot of my bed and said 2 things. First, don't marry this man. And second..." I paused. My throat tightened, but I pushed through. She said, "His heart holds a ruin you do not know. Go find the child he left behind." Daniel looked away. "I thought she meant Elijah," I continued. "But now I know she meant you." He let out a shuddering breath. "I've spent years trying to forget that child." "I know," I said, "but forgetting isn't the same as healing." Another silence fell between us, but this one felt different. Not thick with fear, but heavy with possibility. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small. I recognized it instantly, the brass coin Jonah had given him. "You are not what was done to you." He placed it on the table between us like an offering. "I want to believe this," he said, "but I don't know how." "You show up," I said. "You keep showing up, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." "I'm afraid," he admitted. "Of what?" He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not the man who hurt me, but the boy who was never told he was enough. "That I'm too far gone," he said. "That no matter what I do, I'll never be the kind of father Elijah deserves." I leaned in, slowly, carefully. "Do you think perfect fathers are the ones who never make mistakes, or the ones who admit them and choose to stay anyway?" He didn't answer. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," I added. "I'm asking you to be present." Daniel closed his eyes. Tears slipped down his cheeks, quiet, honest, not for show. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know," I said. He reached for my hand, and for a moment, at a brief, almost imperceptible second, I wanted to forgive him right then and there, to wipe the slate clean, to believe that love could undo what pain had done, but I didn't. Because forgiveness isn't erasure. It's not forgetting, It's not pretending. It's choosing to put down the knife you could rightfully use. And walking away without striking. So I pulled my hand back gently. I'm not going to say I forgive you, I told him. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I will say this. You don't need me to forgive you. He looked at me, confused. You need to forgive yourself, I said. That's the only way this ever changes. He stared at the coin. I don't know how to start. Start small, I said. Tell the truth, over and over, until it stops tasting like blood. We sat there for a long time. No more confessions. No more tears, just presence. And then quietly, I walked him to the door. He turned before leaving. Thank you, he said. I didn't respond, not because I was cold, but because healing doesn't always come with words. Sometimes it comes in silence, sometimes in release, and sometimes it comes in the choice not to hate the person who hurt you, even when you could. There's a weight that doesn't crush you but lingers, like soaked fabric on skin, refusing to dry. That's what forgiveness felt like. It wasn't release. Not yet. It was the deliberation before. The choice to unclench, to soften, to feel. Again, even when it hurt. Patricia called and asked if we could meet. All of us, she said. Lena was wary. What does she want? To speak, I said. Simone raised an eyebrow. She's had decades. But she came anyway. We all did. Lena's apartment was small but warm, the kind of place where the floor creaked honestly, and the walls wore laughter like soft paint. Patricia arrived 15 minutes early, holding a tin of store-bought lemon cookies with trembling hands. Her lipstick was too bright, her blouse too neat. She looked like a woman trying to rehearse redemption. We didn't offer coffee. No one sat. I'll keep this short, Patricia began. You don't owe me your time, and I don't expect anything. But I came here because I need to own what I helped create. No one interrupted. When Daniel was born, I promised myself I would raise him better than I'd been raised. I swore I'd be the buffer between him and my husband's anger. I told myself love was enough. Her voice cracked. But love without truth is just denial in a prettier dress. Simone sat down slowly. Patricia's gaze moved between us. I covered for him. Every mistake, every disappearing act, every woman he hurt. I told myself he was just lost or misunderstood. I told myself you were all too emotional. Her hands shook slightly. But I see now, I wasn't protecting him. I was protecting the illusion that he was still redeemable. I thought if no one called him out, he wouldn't become like his father. And I was wrong. She looked down. I failed Daniel. And by doing so, I failed all of you. And Elijah most of all. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was heavy, with consideration, with pain, with the slow unwinding of years. Lena spoke first. Her voice soft but steady. When I was pregnant, I imagined his mother would welcome me. Instead, you looked right through me, like I was a mistake. I know, Patricia whispered. I thought I hated you, Lena continued. But the truth is, I envied you. I envied the way you loved him, even when he didn't deserve it. And now, Patricia asked. Now, Lena said. I just want my son to grow up without needing to recover from the people who were supposed to protect him. Simone nodded. That's all any of us want. I watched Patricia's composure begin to splinter, not theatrically, but quietly, like something surrendering from the inside. I don't ask you to forgive me, she said. I only ask that you don't let my silence define what happens next. No one said anything for a long time, and then slowly, gently, Lena stood, walked to the kitchen, brought back the tin of cookies, and set it on the table. Not as acceptance, but as acknowledgement. We have a choice, I said, not between justice and mercy, but between punishment and responsibility. Simone looked at me. You're saying don't report him? I'm saying reporting him won't teach him what he needs to learn. And what's that? I looked toward the window, where Elijah's drawings fluttered on the glass. That you can't run from love. That sometimes, being made to stay, to look people in the eyes, to show up day after day, is the real sentence. Patricia's eyes welled. Then let me stay too. And so, we made a choice. We chose not to pursue legal charges. Not because Daniel deserved grace, but because we deserved peace. He entered a residential rehab program the next week, voluntarily, no pressure, no cameras, no statements. Just a suitcase and a willingness to stop running. He called Elijah once a week, sent letters, sometimes full of clumsy drawings, sometimes just one sentence, "I'm still here." He paid child support, got a part-time job at a bookstore, started therapy with someone who didn't flinch when he talked about his father, didn't try to fix him, just listened. And it wasn't fast, it wasn't clean, but it was consistent. 3 months in, he asked to attend Elijah's birthday party. Lena said yes, on the condition that he come early to help set up and stay to clean after. He agreed. That day, he arrived in a wrinkled shirt and brought a used copy of The Little Prince, its pages carefully annotated. "It's the only book that ever made me cry," he told Elijah. Elijah blinked at him. Because it's sad, Daniel knelt down. Because it tells the truth, and that was enough. Patricia came too, not as a guest, but as a grandmother. She brought orange balloons and helped frost the cake. At one point, I watched her sit with Simone's sister, quietly tying favor bags together like they'd done it for years. We didn't forget. We didn't pretend. We healed forward. That meant talking about the ugly parts. That meant holding Daniel accountable when he slipped, when he forgot a call or got defensive in therapy or missed a payment. It meant reminding him that repair isn't a single act. It's 1,000 tiny choices stacked on top of each other. Proof that love, real love, does the dishes and keeps its appointments. One night, he sent a photo of his 6-month sobriety chip. No caption, just the coin. I didn't respond with applause or advice, just a text back. "Keep going, he's watching you." Because Elijah was watching, and so were we. Healing isn't quiet, it's loud in its persistence. It's awkward conversations and boundaries and redrawn trust maps. It's breaking the cycle without burning the people inside it. We didn't let Daniel off the hook. We let him back in, slowly, conditionally, with eyes wide open. Not to erase the past, but to give the future a fighting chance. I never wore the dress. It still hung in the back of my closet, a ghost of a life I had almost chosen. The tags were still attached, ivory silk, hand-sewn lace at the sleeves, and a row of tiny buttons so delicate I once needed help just to try it on. I remember standing in that boutique, smiling into mirrors that lied, surrounded by strangers who applauded my glow. But there was no glow. There was only numbness, dressed up in satin, after everything unraveled. After the dream, the confrontation, the truth. I stopped looking at the dress as a beginning. It became a relic, a costume for a role I was never meant to play. So I let it go. I sold the dress, canceled the venue, donated the decorations, took the savings, and did something none of my friends could have predicted. I rented a rundown corner storefront, where a failing hardware store had once lived. The walls smelled like rust and pine. The ceiling creaked, and someone had left behind a cracked mirror in the back office. But to me, it was perfect. I called it the Haven. There was no press release, no grand opening gala, just a homemade sign on the door, "You are safe here," even if no one believed you before. The first day, I sat alone in a plastic folding chair, waiting. For what, I didn't know. A miracle? A purpose? Instead, Lena came. She didn't speak at first. Just walked in, looked around, then set a small stuffed rabbit on the bookshelf. "Elijah's outgrown it," she said softly. "But it's still got good dreams in it." That became our unofficial motto, "Still got good dreams in it." By week 2, Simone brought in a stack of blank journals and a pack of markers. "For the ones who aren't ready to talk," she said. "Writing's another way of screaming." Patricia showed up not long after. She didn't apologize again. She just brought homemade soup and asked if the floors needed sweeping. The answer was yes, and she did. We became a rhythm. Some women came once and never returned. Others stayed. Quiet at first, then with trembling voices, then with stories. Some brought bruises, some brought babies, some brought only silence, and left with something close to hope. Daniel didn't come, not for weeks. And then one Thursday afternoon, I saw him. Not in the building, but outside the window, leaning against a tree, watching Elijah draw spaceships in chalk on the sidewalk. He didn't wave, he didn't knock, just watched. I stepped outside. He looked thinner, older, but there was something new in his eyes. Not shame, not hope, just a kind of stillness I hadn't seen before. "I'm not here to fix anything," he said. "I know I can't." "I know," I said, "but I'm not running anymore." We stood in silence. "I send Elijah drawings," he added. "Little stories." I never asked him to reply. "You shouldn't." "I won't," he said. "But I'll keep sending them. Because he deserves to know someone's why, thinking of him." That was the moment I realized redemption isn't an event. It's a posture. A choice made again and again, quietly, consistently, imperfectly. Daniel volunteered at a local shelter, attended meetings, walked the long, lonely road of accountability, not for applause, for alignment, with the man he wanted to be. 6 months later, he showed up at Haven again, this time with no speech, just a modest donation envelope and a used bookshelf. "I built it," he said. "Thought maybe the kids' corner needed more height." We placed it in the reading nook. Elijah filled it with graphic novels the next day. The Haven grew. We didn't go viral. We didn't seek funding. But women found us, through whispers, through community boards, through the sacred chain of survivors who had learned to trust again. We held writing workshops, healing circles, quiet days where no one had to say a word. We shared recipes, shared grief, shared silence without awkwardness. We didn't fix lives. We held space for them. Every last Sunday of the season, we held a picnic. No speeches, no fundraising, just people, real people, with messes and laughter and second chances. That summer, the air was heavy with honeysuckle. The trees danced in lazy arcs. Patricia made her famous lemon cake. Lena brought Elijah and a kite. Simone handed out quote cards she'd handwritten. "You survived. Now learn to live." We sat under patchwork quilts. Kids chased bubbles and fell into grass. Maya, the version of me that once feared silence, sat peacefully beside them all, no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't holding my breath anymore. Daniel arrived late with a cooler and folding chairs. He didn't sit with me, but he smiled. He spent most of the afternoon helping Simone set up the book table. At one point, I watched him tie Elijah's sneaker, gently, without ceremony. And when Elijah ran off again, Daniel just sat back and exhaled. Not everything needs a headline. Sometimes, healing is that small. Later that night, when the stars began to yawn open, I dreamed of her again. Grandmother Rose stood at the edge of a lavender field. She looked younger, lighter. The lines in her face were smiles instead of scars. "I knew you would," she said. "Knew I would what?" "Choose truth over performance. Choose others without losing yourself." She took my hand, squeezed gently. "You broke the cycle, darling." I swallowed hard. "I don't know if I saved him." "You saved something bigger," she whispered. "You saved more than just yourself." I woke up with tear-damp hair and the scent of jasmine drifting through the window. And for the first time in my life, I felt full, not fixed, not triumphant, but whole and free. We didn't get the perfect ending. We got something better, a place where women remember their names, where shame doesn't sit at the table, where sons learn to show up, where silence is no longer sacred. The Haven now has 2 branches. Simone runs one. Lena consults with the local school board on trauma-informed programs. Patricia is officially our child care coordinator. And I sit in the back sometimes, not to lead, just to witness, to make tea, to keep the lamps warm. Because some people light fires, others hold the flame steady, and that is enough. In the end, Maya realized that some forms of revenge require no screaming, no blows, and no turning yourself into someone as cold as the one who hurt you. Sometimes, true revenge is simply rising and walking in a direction the other person never had the courage to take. She didn't choose to ruin Daniel's life. No lawsuits, no exposés, no public unmasking. She simply chose to do what he never could, face the truth, and build a life of integrity from whatever remained. And that alone was enough to make the darkness retreat. The haven wasn't just a shelter for abandoned women. It was proof that pain, when placed in the right hands, could become a light to guide others forward. On this journey, no one was whole, but each person dared to take one more step, dared to speak a truth slightly bigger than yesterday, dared to stand beside one another instead of apart. And sometimes, that is how a new family is born. Not from perfect vows, but from hearts that have once been cracked open. At the end of the story, as Maya looked around the sun-drenched picnic, Lena laughing, Simone reading, Patricia retying the ribbon in Elijah's hair, she understood that she hadn't merely survived. She had broken free from fate, and somehow she had led others to break free from it too. Not through revenge, but through compassion with boundaries, through strength that didn't need to shout, through refusing to let the darkness write the final chapter. If you've read this far, leave a comment. No need for fancy words, no need for long speeches, just one honest sentence. Because who knows, the words you write might become the lifeline for someone quietly finding their way out of their own darkness.